Good morning and un hermoso buenos dias a todos aquí. I'm Susan MacDonnell and I'll be the service leader today. And breaking my phone while I'm at it. You know, every Sunday we welcome you, and it's important that you know it's not just a word we throw around, oh, welcome. We really do mean it, and we're so happy when we see new faces as well as all the regulars. You really are so welcome here. Whether here in San Miguel in our UU Fellowship or somewhere else in the world, when you walk into a Unitarian Universalist service, our hope is that you feel welcome, bringing your whole selves, your life experiences and beliefs, your baggage as well as your gifts. If we have any visitors here today, we would love it if you would stand just for a moment so we can see who you are. Great, yeah, thank you. We don't have time in our service to learn more about you, but if you're able to stay afterwards, we have coffee and goodies downstairs, outside, and I know we will be happy to get to know you a little bit if you're able to stay for a few minutes. If we have visitors on Zoom, you can enter your name and where you're from into the chat box so others on Zoom can see that and greet you after the service. We record our Sunday services, and you can expect to see this one up sometime this week, perhaps. I think that's always the plan. And to view previous services, you can go to UUFSMA.org and click on Previous Services on the main page. There's a couple of announcements I've been asked to make. Tom asked that everybody be aware that there will be a celebration of the life of Bob Leonard, longtime member of our fellowship and active in many community organizations, with a memorial service on Wednesday, April 11th, that's a week from this Wednesday, at 2 p.m. here at the Aldea. It will also be possible to participate by Zoom if that's necessary. Information on how to join by Zoom will go out sometime later this week. And for all of our board members, new and continuing, who are here in person today, we're being asked to stay after service, if we possibly can, for just a brief meeting. Joan Wolfe, our incoming president, and Jurgen Ahlers would like to share an idea they have for us to build some community among ourselves. We'll be at the back table downstairs, so you'll have time to grab some coffee and some cookies, and then join us for a few minutes. For other announcements, look on the back of the order of service or on our website, UUFSMA.org. Those on Zoom can remain connected at the end of the service to greet each other and share your thoughts on today's services. And for those of us here, we'll chat downstairs with coffee and sugar for fortification. As we here in San Miguel cannot help but notice, today marks the beginning of Holy Week in the Christian calendar. And we are also just 3 days away from the beginning of Passover, or Pesach in Hebrew, which begins this Wednesday, April 5th, and goes to the 12th. And even those of us who aren't Jewish likely have some knowledge of the Passover story. It commemorates the slavery of the Israelites in Egypt and their ultimate exodus to freedom. It can be considered the master story of the Jewish people, a story that has shaped Jewish consciousness for centuries. And while not specifically centering the Passover story today in our service, it will be very much tied to the stories of the significance of exile and liberation throughout the world and for all time and in all times. Stories of searching for safety, for home. We hope that our interwoven music, images, and readings, along with Jurgen's sermon, will allow you to experience some of that yearning and ultimately the new hope and new life that both Easter and Passover can symbolize for us. Now I invite us all to take a nice relaxing breath as we enter our time of worship together. For observances both holy and worldly, when we recall the old stories, we light this flame. For Passover, which reminds us of the courage and strength of people from every part of our troubled world, we light this flame. For gathering today in this sacred space, we light this flame. And for the opportunity to be together as a community, to remember the past, to plan for our future, and to be alive in the present, we light this flame. Today is very special. It's once again the first Sunday of the month, and that means we have some of our children from the Religious Education Program, RE, to participate in their own chalice lighting. You'll see inside your order of service a double-sided insert, and one side has the words to the children's covenant along with the gestures that we make. I will read the words in English, and we'll do the gestures. And then the children and you, I hope, will read along with Lourdes in Spanish and repeat those gestures. After that, we'll light the children's chalice. We light this chalice to celebrate Unitarian Universalism. Oh. Okay, come up with me then. We'll do it your way. Okay. This is the place of the open mind.
Este es el lugar de la mente abierta.
This is the place of the helping hands.
Este es el lugar de las manos que ayudan.
This is the place of the loving heart.
Este es el lugar del corazón amoroso.
Together we care for each other, for the earth, and we work for friendship and peace in our world.
Juntos nos cuidamos unos a otros, cuidamos la tierra y trabajamos por la amistad y la paz en nuestro mundo.
Okay. You ready? Sing. The words are on that insert as well. We'll do the Spanish first, so the children are sure to understand it, and then we'll sing the English. Okay. Vayan en paz, pueda el amor rodearlos por doquiera, por doquiera. Wonderful, that was great. Now we'll join our voices together in song for our first hymn. Our world is one world. You can, of course, find it in the hymnal if you like, number 134, and the words will be on the screen. Please stand if you're willing and if you're able, and then remain standing for the covenant. We'll say our covenant. I will read the English, and Hilary Toyrilla will help us with the Spanish. We respect the interdependent web of life and work for a just and peaceful world. We encourage the search for truth and meaning, strive for compassion, our relationships, and seek values that will benefit our lives and the lives of others. This is our covenant.
I'm going to slow down a bit. Respetamos todos los estilos de vida dentro de su red interdependiente y trabajamos por un mundo justo y pacífico. Alentamos la búsqueda de la verdad y la comprensión total. Nos esforzamos por mantener compasión en nuestras relaciones y buscamos valores que beneficien nuestras vidas y las vidas de los demás. Este es nuestro convenio.
Good morning, my friends. We are entering now one of the most sacred, most meaningful parts of our worship together, where we share our joys, our concerns, our sorrows that have been on our hearts, and we lift them high in our compassion for healing, for celebrating. The first candle we light this morning is for Judy Rosenthal, who is still in Mexico City, but getting stronger every day. She should be coming home to SMA this coming Tuesday, and we'll be very happy to welcome her back into our midst. Another joy we light for Stan Allen, who's still in Atlanta, but he had very successful surgery and is planning to be back on the 8th of April. Again, we'll be very happy to receive him. And you know, his energy is so contagious. I've been missing it over the last couple of weeks. It's going to be good to have my friend Stan back. Right now, Michael and Kathy Murphy are in Houston, where Kathy will have hip replacement surgery. I can identify with that this week. We send them our thoughts and prayers and definitely our best wishes for a very successful operation and a swift recovery. My yet living hero, we light a candle of thanksgiving and of joy for a man familiar to all of us, namely Jimmy Carter, who, as you know, has willingly submitted himself to hospice care in his home in Plains, surrounded by his loving wife, Rosalind, and his family and friends. I worked for Jimmy Carter for a couple of years. I was very fortunate to have gotten to know both of the Carters, and our prayers certainly go with him as he enters the last phase of his life. He is 98 years old. Another candle of joy over this past week, several additional pledges have been made giving testimony of goodwill for a continuing healing and serving the beloved community. We rejoice in this change that we've been looking for. And as every Sunday we light our candle, our blue and yellow candle representing the nation of Ukraine and the completely insane war that rages now for 14 months, and we wonder, when will it ever end? I don't want to say too much about this war. We all suffer because of it, but the very intention of it by a madman behind the massive walls of the Kremlin, imagining a 19th century imperialistic drive to be great in history, I think he will be remembered as Vladimir the Terrible and not the Great. We light a candle of deep sorrow as yet another recent random school shooting of 6 persons in Nashville has occurred just a few days ago. And we cry, when will this madness in the U.S. finally come to our senses with lax gun control, which leads to self-destruction of our society? Are there any joys, concerns from our Zoom group? I don't see any. So finally, we light a candle that is lit for all the joys, concerns, and sorrow that remain unspoken but lie deeply within our hearts.
This week marks the beginning of Holy Week in the Christian Church, and it overlaps, as it often does, with the beginning of the Jewish celebration of Passover. Jurgen Ahlers, who I truly believe needs little introduction, as he's known to nearly all of us, will speak to the themes of suffering and hope, of exile and of finding home that is so central to the Passover story. But before he begins, he and I would like to share a reading from the book of Isaiah in the Hebraic scriptures. Isaiah is recognized both in Christian and Jewish religious traditions as one of the great Hebrew prophets.
The Spirit of God has sent me to bring good news to the oppressed,
To bind up the brokenhearted,
to proclaim liberty to the captives and release to the prisoners,
to comfort all who mourn,
to give them a garland instead of ashes,
the oil of gladness instead of mourning.
the mantle of praise instead of a faint spirit.
They shall build up the ancient ruins. They shall raise up the former devastations, the devastations of many generations.
You shall be named servants of God. May the meditations of my heart and the words that I speak be acceptable to all who are here in this special time together. Oppression in one form or another of one people toward another is as old as humankind. And the yearning, the craving to be freed from the shackles of oppression or slavery lies at the very depth of the human soul. But it's not just the oppression of a segment of society over against another. The harm a sixth-grade bully inflicts on a classmate often triggers damage that will last a lifetime. Oppression, however intense, however it is practiced, is evil. And the thirst for deliverance, the yearning to breathe freely, to be all you can be, lies at the very essence of what it means to be fully human, to be a mensch. Now, although it's true that oppression has been around since the dawn of humankind, the very first recorded account of oppression of a whole people is found in the Hebraic scripture about 1,300 years before the Common Era in the Exodus story of the Israelites fleeing from the Pharaoh's heavy, cruel treatment of a particular people. The Israelites were a class of slaves in servitude to the elite ruling class of Egypt. And as the story goes, as God's chosen people, they miraculously are ushered against all odds into the promised land, but not yet. There was still, according to the account of Scripture, 40 years or 2 generations that they spent in the wilderness before they finally reached the promised land. Whether you believe the literal account of the parting of the sea is immaterial. It's like the vast majority of biblical narrative having strong metaphorical teaching significance, not just for the Jews, but for all of humankind. I need here to take you on a small but important detour It's true that according to Hebraic scripture, the Israelites were, according to their faith tradition, chosen by their God to be partners with God, to live in accordance to certain regulations, I would say accountability, encapsulated initially in the Ten Commandments and eventually in the Torah, or the first 5 books of the Bible. The Torah was referred to as the law of God, which established a covenantal relationship, a binding agreement between the creator of all of life, God, and his chosen people. Now, here it's important not to conclude that the chosen people had superior attributes over any other people. A common misconception, even an entrapment, both among certain Jews and non-Jews alike, spanning many, many centuries. The Jewish narrative simply states that as a people, the 12 tribes of Israel were selected to be an example to all people, to live in accordance to divinely ordained principles, regulations that would assure a healthy, responsible way of living life on earth. And passing on this story of deliverance to God's guidance to future generations, even to this very day. Needless to say, these regulations, as recorded in Scripture, have had their nuanced interpretation over time. We don't take the regulations listed in the book of Leviticus, for instance, definitely not literally, at least very few people do. And yet the bottom line of the Exodus story, from enslavement to liberation, remains the definitive origin of the Israelites, with Moses interpreted contemporaneously as the first liberation theologian. I would even wager to say that the message of the Exodus story is in the very DNA of the Jewish people, whether religiously observant or not. In many ways, the Exodus story has become the classical leitmotif of their chosen path. For example, Philo of Alexandria, a philosopher in the 1st century BCE, was not an observant Jew, but to Philo, God, or the creative force of the universe, was the source of freedom, of oppression for all people. When Christianity, with deep roots in the Jewish tradition, spread over the centuries, liberation was at the forefront. For example, the Reformation, or the word protest, or Protestantism, Protestantism as we now call it. When Martin Luther nailed his 95 Theses to the church door, he was ringing the death knell of the established exploitative church, which had become so entwined, so comfortable with the state, to the drive for self-preservation at the expense of all the believers. And ironically, when the peasant revolution ensued from his nailing of those 95 Theses, Luther was resistant. His reasoning, he said, they don't understand my theological treatise. Well, my answer to that is, if theology is not relevant to the social, economic, political reality of the times, then it becomes mute. Theology, at its very essence, has the mandate to engage in dialogue, to be relevant to enhancing the quality of human existence, especially in the context of injustice and oppression, or simply it becomes meaningless. This morning, I want to emphasize the long historic legacy of men and women of the Jewish heritage who were at the forefront of the liberation movement. Yearning deeply for a life worth living. Let's have a brief look at Karl Marx. Certainly no devout Jew, and yet on both maternal and paternal side, his grandfathers were rabbis. Marx's father, however, an attorney by trade, converted to Christianity, believing that it would be advantageous to his profession. Summarily, he had his 7 children, including Marx, baptized in the Lutheran tradition. Yet, as we all know, Karl, already as a young man, arrived at the conviction that religion is the opium of the people. The point I want to make here is that Marx's Jewish ancestry, the leading thread that knit one generation to subsequent generations, was liberation writ large. Marx was all too aware of the human suffering induced by the callous greed, the opportunism of the moguls forging the Industrial Revolution, and the birthing of Das Kapital, or capitalism, and its ensuing inhumanity. From Marx onward, into the mid-20th century, Ernst Bloch, a student of Marx and non-religious Jew, who wrote Das Prinzip Hoffnung, the Principle of Hope, in 3 volumes, who wrote that the theology of hope, there's an urgency for radical change in a rapidly disorienting world that triggered challenges, momentous challenges. Right behind Ernst Bloch's Das Prinzip Hoffnung was Jurgen Moltmann's Theologie der Hoffnung, the theology of hope. And with these joint Jewish and Christian volumes, there's a word that escapes me right now, tomes, it's amazing how simultaneously revolutionary movements were moving throughout the world. I mention only a few. Vatican II, the Cuban Revolution, liberation theology in Latin America, the civil rights and anti-Vietnam movement in the US, black liberation, and the assassination of the brothers Kennedy and Martin Luther King Jr., anti-authoritarianism and women's liberation movements. It all seemed as if the world was spinning out of control. Then, as many of you remember the 1968 Democratic Convention in Chicago, which led to a not insignificant backlash that ushered in the Nixons, Reagan, the Bushes, and finally the uniquely American fascination of celebrity Trump into the Oval Office. Is it any wonder that we're witnessing so much polarization in our world and the yearning for the good old days, without much thought given to those masses of migrants fleeing oppression, war, natural disasters in their homeland, hoping against hope, hoping against all odds, risking life and limb to find a life worth living. How well I remember as a 10-year-old immigrant. Yeah, I was an immigrant too. Crossing the turbulent Atlantic in late December of 1949, having to cope with unrelenting seasickness for most of the crossing, finally, just as dawn was breaking on that longed-for final day, to feel the sudden silence of the ship's relentless engines, completely silenced. Impatient, I jumped into my clothes, dashing to the deck to see the barges inaudibly towing up the Hudson River. And there on the port side, she stood in the still distance, the colossal green statue, the Liberty of Justice. Her arms stretched high, bearing the radiant torch to greet the stranger from across the sea. And in the early morning silence, almost able to touch the Manhattan's majestic gleaming towers reaching into the sky, never had I seen such a sight. It was almost too much for me in my 10-year-old brain to grasp. Coming from my Hamburg neighborhood, a post-World War II rubble, playing in the ruins where I imagined people had once dined, played, laughed, and loved, and now just collapsed walls, mortar and broken brick, with weeds and little trees sprouting up everywhere. 5 years later, singing in my high school chorus the powerful words written by Emma Lazarus, a Jew, inscribed at the feet of Lady Liberty, set to the plaintive yet hopeful tune by another Jew, Ervin Barrios. I'll never forget singing it. Let's see if I can remember. You may remember it. Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free, the wretched refuse of your teeming shore. Send these, the homeless tempest-tossed, my way. I raise my lamp upon the golden door. That following Christmas, when I was 15, I was resolved, saying to my parents, I'm going to visit the Statue of Liberty today. You know, the Germans celebrate Christmas on Christmas Eve. Christmas Day is more or less a family day. But I decided it's a good time for me to take the express bus, about an hour's ride from where my parents had their home, to Manhattan, and from there a short ferry ride to Liberty Island. And, you know, I was actually impatient to actually see those words by Emma Lazarus chiseled into the Liberty's base. Fortunate for me, Christmas morning in the US, most folk were home unwrapping gifts, so it was an easy climb high inside the Mother of Exiles, with only a few folk gawking as I was through the opening of this majestic crown overlooking the Hudson River and looking at Midtown Manhattan. And I looked over to the side and I saw Ellis Island, the US entry point for countless emigrant exiles, how I could now grasp, now finally understand the profound significance of those millions fleeing oppression or just plain misery, as did I, and envisioning a new life. full of promise, a life worth living. Back then, around 1955, the land and concept America was indeed a land of unlimited opportunity. What made America great was precisely its diversity. A land of migrants who over the centuries came with an eagerness and urgency, with creativity and grit to build a life filled with meaning, initially for themselves, of course, but ultimately for the well-being to contribute to the burgeoning of all of society. Oh yes, the statue still stands. Those words still inscribed at her feet. But the symbol in imploring its message has somehow lost its luster today. Too many Americans, but not only Americans, have turned their backs to the promise the statue symbolizes, fearing the stranger. Today, across the world, we're seeing unprecedented vast migratory patterns, hundreds of millions fleeing political persecution, dire poverty, famine, in part due to radical climate shifts. We're seeing populist leaders scapegoating others to cover their own inadequacy in meeting global challenges. They cry invasion, when in actuality, those very people they scapegoat risk life and limb to seek a chance, just a chance to contribute their youthful, creative, can-do spirit and brawn to forge a better life for everyone. We don't need more xenophobia. What we need is a heavy dose of philoxenia, another Greek word. Philoxenia, the love of the stranger, embracing those who are other, who differ from our points of view, embracing them with the dignity and the self-worth that they are due. Extending a welcoming hand, practicing the noble art of hospitality to those who walk through the valley of the shadow, because they truly remind us of what it means to be fully human, created in divine image. In the faith tradition that I come from, we speak of the last judgment, the ultimate judgment. Again, also a reference, this reference is meant to be understood metaphorically. It is the story as it goes. Jesus, the risen Christ, returns at the end of all time, and he separates all nations, all people who have ever lived on the face of the planet into two, the goats and the sheep, to his left and to his right. And he says to the goats, "Depart from me for all time, because when I was hungry, you didn't give me food, and I was thirsty, you didn't give me drink. When I was lonely and imprisoned, you didn't visit me." And the goats said to him, "When, Lord? When did we see you hungry and thirsty and didn't give you food or drink? When did we see you lonely and we didn't visit you?" And he answers in response, "Inasmuch as you didn't do it to the least of these, my brothers and sisters, you did it not unto me." And then he says to the sheep, I guess they were on his right, I don't know. He says, "Depart from me." No. He says, "Come to me for all time." Basically the same words, turned around just slightly. Because when I was hungry, you fed me. When I was thirsty, you gave me to drink. When I was lonely and imprisoned, you visited me. And they responded, just as surprised as the goats. "When, Lord? When did we see you hungry and we fed you? When did we give you drink when you were thirsty? When were you lonely and we visited you? And he says in kind, inasmuch as you did it to the least of these, my brothers and sisters, you did it to me. Now, I am sharing this because this is a way of speaking of the ultimate judgment of all of us, the way we live our daily lives. Why am I closing with this parable, this metaphor? In actuality, this story is not particularly unique because perhaps its language is unique, but the essential message rings loud in just about every of the great religions of the world. Do unto one another. Thank you. As you would have them do unto you. It's known as the golden rule. And I know the cynics in the world say, they turn that around and they say, yeah, he who has the gold rules. But the cynic doesn't understand. Doesn't have a clue about the grit, the courage, the humbleness it takes to risk everything for a new life worth living. The cynic cannot identify with those less fortunate than he. To be sure, it does take courage, take something of the heart. It does take love to embrace the stranger. It takes determination, risks to change both to change from our comfort zones, ready to open our hearts to the less privileged, to open ourselves to those who have differing views and embrace them with grace and dignity and ultimately with love, risking together a new life filled with surprise and promise for generations to come. Like the Statue of Liberty, the mother of exiles, let us lift high the torch of freedom and together work to unlock the golden door. Don't let the light that burns in your and my heart, that identifies with the yearning of the migrant, don't let that light go out. May it be so.
Well, Jurgen got all the sound effects. See if I get a few. Thank you so much. That was an excellent message for us to remember on this day. Well, if you're like me, and you may not be, you don't always come to Sunday service all bright and sparkly, full of vim and vigor. Sometimes I come, maybe you do too, feeling world-weary, having seared my eyes and my ears for too many hours with the latest news of the world, just the too muchness of all the suffering and dysfunctions we humans can so easily create. And yet, I practically always leave Sunday services, maybe you do, feeling refreshed, having been renewed by a meaningful message, a favorite hymn, just by the hopefulness of the spirit that exists here in community. This place of worship exists because we make it so. With our contributions, the gifts of our time, our skills, our food, our love, our laughter, and yes, our money. Not so long ago, most church-going folks in most churches used the offering plate to fulfill their annual pledges. We don't often do that nowadays. We can click on a church website or set up automatic transfers from our bank accounts or even a payment app. We don't necessarily have the tactile experience of making our offering real. But passing the offering plate, I read in a very interesting piece from another UU, was never just a practical exercise for collecting money. It's always been a ritual, regardless really of the church you belong to. Even if your pledge is paid up, for some of us it still feels meaningful to participate in the ritual of putting a few bucks, a few pesos in the basket as it passes us. It's a reminder to us of the form of love that we call generosity. Our offering can be an affirmation, a yes. When we give, we say yes to something that we value. So with our gifts freely given, may we say yes to the values of our faith and of this fellowship. May our offering help us practice Unitarian Universalism within and beyond our congregation as tools that help us empower our mission. So we will now pass the baskets and collect the offering, and it will be gratefully received. Thank you. We'd like to invite you to stand and join together for our closing hymn. We will sing verses 2 and 3 of Light One Candle. Did I say that right? Yeah, second and third verses. They'll appear on the screen. And if you're in the hymnal, if you want to hold that heavy thing, invite you to rise as you're willing and able. can be seated. Jurgen will join me for our closing words. And then we invite you to watch a lovely and meaningful video, Mother of Exiles, which I think you'll find very profound. Oh, good. We're on a journey. We didn't plan it. We didn't have time for the bread to rise. We may find ourselves in the wilderness, hungry, thirsty, doubting that we should ever have come. But look around, we're not alone. It is our journey together, a journey to our better selves, a journey to a better world, a journey to a more promised land.
Not like the brazen giant of Greek faith, with conquering limbs, astride from land to land. Here at our sea-washed sunset gate shall stand a mighty woman with a torch, whose flame is the imprisoned lightning, and her name, Mother of Exiles, Mother of Exiles, Mother of Exiles, Mother of Exiles. From her beacon hand glows worldwide welcome. Her mild eyes command the air bridge harbor that twin cities frame. Keep your